Good evening. I'm Linda Lara from the Aspen Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Conversations with Great Leaders. In fact, this is our kickoff of the fall series. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd also like to welcome you to Roosevelt House, the Public Policy Institute of Hunter College, and the former home of Franklin and Eleanor and Sarah Roosevelt. And Roosevelt House is actually the Aspen Institute's home away from home. We're headquartered in DC, but most of the programming that we do in New York City is held here, thanks to a very generous partnership with Hunter College and President Jennifer Rabb. So thank you, Jennifer. And I'd also like to give a special welcome to the Aspen Institute Society of Fellows and Vanguard members, and let them know that there are some great programs that we're planning for you in New York City in the fall. And anybody else who would like to possibly join or find out about programming can go to our website, which is on your program today. So the Conversation with Great Leaders series in memory of Preston Robert Tisch began in 2009 as a way to feature leaders who are making a difference in their communities by the way they look at their role in helping to build a civil society, or in other words, a society in which we all want to live. Those leaders represent the values and commitment to public good that reflects the belief and work of the man honored by this series, Bob Tisch. His family, Steve Tisch, Lori Tisch, and Lizzie and Jonathan Tisch, and the Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund, and Lori is right there, generously make it possible. Yes, she deserves a big round of applause. Generously make it possible for us to bring you the wisdom of the man you are going to be hearing from this evening. So I don't have to probably give you a whole lot of background on him, but most of us know Nick Kristof because of his op-ed columns in the New York Times that focus attention on crucial issues facing society today, from gun policies to corruption and civil war in Africa to human trafficking. He and his wife, former Times reporter Cheryl Wu Dunn, won a Pulitzer in 1990 for their coverage of China's Tiananmen Square movement. He won a second Pulitzer in 2006 for his coverage of the Darfur genocide. His books, co-written with his wife, address issues of inequality and opportunity in a world where being poor, or being a child, or being a woman often means neglect, oppression, and a daily struggle for survival. Just reading about these problems can make you despair about ever finding a way to improve conditions, especially if you're an individual trying to address them, which is where Nick and Cheryl's latest book comes in. A Path Appears, Transforming Lives, Creating Opportunity, looks at ways we can all help to bring about social change. And Nick will be signing his book upstairs after the program. So to discuss these possibilities tonight, Nick will be joined by moderator Harry Sreenivasan, the anchor of PBS NewsHour Weekend, and the senior correspondent for the nightly program, as well as their director of digital partnerships and strategies. Prior to joining the NewsHour, Harry reported exclusively for a number of news outlets, including CBS News and ABC News. We served as an anchor and correspondent. So now I'll turn the program over to him for this very important conversation. Harry?
Thank you so much for having us here. And generally, in the flow of the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about the book, and then obviously, I think a lot of you are curious about all the other things that Nick talks about as well. And we'll have some time for Q&A, including some questions from me, including some questions from social media that I gathered earlier today. And I'm happy not to have to tell you that your cell phones don't need to be off, because I don't think anybody has reception down here. So, first of all, how many of you saw the documentary that aired on PBS or have seen it on a DVD? Just a show of hands. All right, well then Yeah, there's a documentary that went with the book, and it's fantastic. I know about it because it was on PBS, but even if it wasn't on PBS, now it's on DVD. It's available. I think he just said it's streaming on iTunes. I strongly recommend it. And it's actually not the book in video form, so you can have both. I feel like I should sell you a tote bag. For a small price, we'll throw in the book and the DVD. So, for those who saw the documentary, why use actors or actresses? I mean, I remember Jennifer Garner, Eva Longoria, Alfre Woodard. Is it because schlubs like me just remembered beautiful women? Is that why?
Yeah, I mean, kind of frankly, when we were originally debating what to do, we were a little nervous about the idea of bringing in sort of celebrities. We thought that they would come along with endless parades of makeup artists. And since we were doing a lot of shooting around the world, this would be logistically complicated, and also that who knows, they'd be arrested for shoplifting naked in some store somewhere. Who knows? And in fact, though, I think it really worked very well. I mean, we chose celebrities who I think were deeply committed to these issues, and at the end of the day, Cheryl and I wanted to make a difference. We wanted to reach people. We didn't just want to preach to the choir. And there's a great danger with books that are arguing a point that you just preach to the choir. And so we basically wanted to reach people who don't care about issues of inequity or opportunity, or in the case of Half the Sky, about women's rights. And so our thought was that if we can produce some great images and have some celebrities and people who care about Jennifer Garner or care about George Clooney will watch for that reason. Then if we can suck them in, if that can be their gateway drug, then then great. And
it worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a much greater audience, and I hope awakened to people who saw things that I hope shook them up a little bit. I kind of do the same thing with my column. You may have noticed I'm kind of, I have all kind of sort of tricks of the trade to try to get people to care about things that I think they might not want to intuitively do. I have an annual win-a-trip contest where I drag a student with me on a reporting trip in hopes that'll get people more engaged. I once did travel with George Clooney to Darfur in hopes that people would pay attention to that. I do a lot with social media, kind of anything that is kind of up to the line, but that can get more people to pay attention to issues that I deeply care about, then that's fair.
I mean, in this era, at least as journalists, it seems like we have to spend almost maybe 20% more energy thinking about marketing and distribution. It used to be, I wrote it in the New York Times, the world will know.
That's right.
Not so much now.
What changed is that it used to be that when I pushed the button, that was when the work was over. And that's almost now when it gets started. Because now you're trying to connect on social media, you're trying to get a bigger audience, especially with things that don't have an intuitive, natural audience. And a lot of the issues I care about don't. There's sort of a debate in journalism, as you know, about the use of metrics, and should journalists be exposed to stories about to figures about how many people are seeing a given column, for example. And the fear is that if we, as journalists, see the metrics, then we're all going to be writing about about celebrities, about the candy.
We have BuzzFeed for that.
Well, yeah, exactly. We'll be doing listicles of celebrities. And my argument is that if you care about getting people to read about Darfur or whatever it may be, then it's all the more important to have metrics and to understand what is going to work to actually reach people, to care about issues that are non-intuitive, and that we have to use, if you write about celebrities, then you're going to have an audience. If you write about Darfur, then it's a lot harder, and that's where we need the tricks of the trade even more.
So which came first, the television documentary or the book, or how did they work together?
So our previous book had been Half the Sky, about empowering women around the world. And afterward, people kept asking us a couple of kinds of questions. One was, what about the situation here in the U.S.? Because Half the Sky was really focused on women abroad. And other, what about men? And we wrote about gender in part because one of the major impediments to more equal opportunity is gender. Around much of the world, it's a reason kids aren't sent to school. It's a reason they get beaten up. It's a reason that police don't care if they're abused. It's a reason medical resources aren't allocated. It's a reason girls are less likely to be vaccinated. It's a huge window into so much inequity and injustice and lack of opportunity. But of course, there are lots of other reasons for inequity and injustice other than just gender, and especially in the U.S., a lot of them have to do with your socioeconomic status. And so we wanted to try to take a similar look at issues in the U.S. and also to offer a little bit ideas of what people can do. It does seem to us that there's this yearning on the part of people to engage, and I think we in journalism often don't feed that hunger. We tell people what's wrong, but we don't really tell them what they can do. I
mean, your book in the entire first third is peppered with examples of here's this organization, here's what they've done, here's this organization, here's what they've done, right? So, or actually just narratives, and by the way, here's an organization that's actually doing that. And so one of the things that you try to get across is this kind of maybe a common sense point, but I don't think it maybe hits enough people, is why does my $20 or $40 matter, right? In this massive sea of problems that we could tackle, what's it, why? Why should I do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have this this yearning to solve problems, and this notion that you're really only making a difference if you're solving a problem. And obviously, $20 isn't going to solve a problem. I mean, if there are 60 million kids who should be in primary school worldwide who aren't. $20 isn't going to solve that problem. But I'm a believer in that impact doesn't come from solving problems, but from making a marginal difference for a particular kid somewhere. My dad was a World War II refugee. A Portland, Oregon family sponsored his way to the U.S. That didn't solve the global refugee problem. It didn't make a dent in the global refugee problem, but it was completely transformative, obviously, for my family. And in the same way, $20 isn't going to have any impact on the global statistics. On the other hand, $20, for example, will sponsor one child in an organization here in the U.S. called Reach Out and Read, that essentially gives at-risk, low-income kids who often don't have a single children's book in the house. The pediatrician then gives that family children's books and
a prescription.
urges the parents to read, a prescription to read.
Yeah.
And it's been robustly studied. It turns out those kids randomly assigned to Reach Out and Read have bigger vocabularies. They're going to end up doing better in school. And the parents read significantly more to them. And it's $20 a year. And and I do think that there is that there are so many people who want to engage but feel worried about corruption, about inefficiency in aid groups. And these are real concerns. Mm-hmm. And I think people also want to model behavior for their kids. Cheryl and I have 3 kids, and so part of this was us trying to figure out how we get our kids to be more empathetic citizens, care about something other than their cell phone. And how do you do that other than smash their cell phone to bits? Well, we were dragging our kids around on trips to try to expose them to the kind of disadvantage they don't get at their great school, and which in our case, this was always a little awkward. My daughter, I remember once when she was in about the 8th grade, I was dragging her through Honduran slums, and we went through one particularly dicey checkpoint run by these sort of youth gang guys who were drugged out and armed. And so we got through and breathed a sigh of relief, and I said, "Caroline, don't worry, in just a few days we'll be in rural Nicaragua." She turned to me and said, "Dad, my friends, when they go on vacation, they go to the Caribbean." And so actually, Cheryl and I decided our next family trip was going to be to the Caribbean. We took the whole family over Thanksgiving to Haiti during the cholera outbreak. You do what you can.
So how do you choose if you're in that position to give? You point out there are 1.4 million charities out there. I mean, and the fact is that I probably spent more time researching the refrigerator that I'm thinking about buying than I did about where I'm giving to.
I mean, two, maybe three suggestions. One, we tend to give to those who ask. And those who are good at asking tend not to be those who are good at spending. And so we get a marketing call from some organization or some fundraiser. And, we may donate without really thinking deeply about this. I think that's a mistake. We also, what we call charitable donations mostly, frankly, do not benefit the needy. People give to their alma mater, they give to a private school, they give to art museums, to music and culture organizations. Most of the beneficiaries of those are going to be people who were also somewhat privileged, and there are degrees of that, and indeed cultural organizations do have outreach efforts to try to democratize their attendance, but in general, various studies that have looked at this have found that overwhelmingly charitable donations end up going from one privileged household to another privileged household. And so I think looking at this issue of what creates opportunity is one consideration. And I guess the final thing is evidence. It used to be that we didn't really have any, that we would just write checks based on faith and fire it out into the abyss, and we didn't really put much of a sense. These days, in the last 20 years or so, there's been this revolution based on testing interventions as if they were pharmaceutical trials, having randomized controlled trials where you test things and you learn all kinds of things about what works and what doesn't work. There was a lot of excitement about microfinance. When it was carefully tested, it turned out that micro-lending was somewhat less effective than people had hoped. I mean, it helped, but it wasn't transformative the way people had hoped. In contrast, micro-savings, helping people save small amounts of money, actually was transformative for women, although not for men. If you want to get more kids into school in the developing world, which is one of my great passions, I think that education is about as close as you can get to something, an elixir that really transforms not only individuals but countries. And you always think that, okay, the way you get more kids in school is you build more schools, and that's one thing that needs to be done. But there's one good study from some economists, including Michael Kramer at Harvard, that found that the most cost-effective way of getting more kids in school cheaply. Any guesses about, anybody who hasn't read A Path Appears, any guesses about what it is? It has to do with a medicine that would be found, I'm guessing, in quite a few of your homes, but that maybe none of you have ever taken. Any guesses? Deworming. Yes, very good. Deworming. If you might have a pet that you deworm. In much of the world, kids have intestinal parasites, and maybe it's not the best pre-dinner topic, but kids have parasites, and that means that they're more anemic. They're less able to focus on their work. The Rockefeller Foundation dewormed American kids about 100 years ago, and it had this dramatic effect on the ability of kids to study. Likewise, kids who were randomly assigned to be dewormed, they have better school attendance, and even as adults, they actually earn 20% more than those that are randomly assigned to the control group. And it's incredibly cheap to deworm a child. One pill of albendazole once a year costs about 5 cents on international markets, will do the trick. And so the cost of getting one marginal child into the Kenyan school system through bricks and mortar is $350. If you do it through deworming, it's $3.50. So that's the kind of sort of evidence-based approach, and there are similar things domestically, that we're getting a better sense of where you get bang for the buck, that I think the world of philanthropy has to be more focused on, and one thing we emphasize a lot in the book.
You spend the middle third of your book on reforming the way we give, reforming the way we think about giving. You talk about the sort of charity industry, and there's some great stats. You say that we donate about $335 billion. 2/3 of Americans donate, and it averages out to about $1,000 per year. Right? So it's a huge sum of money. And the charities that are out there have an economy of their own. Millions of people are employed in charitable foundations. It gets back to that kind of question of how do you make sure that the money you're giving is getting to the needy versus, and you in the book, you talk about the sort of pluses and minuses of rating something just by the fact that Charity Navigator says, hey, this is the percentage overhead. Oh, well, that's just really wasteful. I shouldn't give there.
Yeah, I think we overdo. I think Charity Navigator, I mean, it has its uses, but the danger is that people end up fundamentally looking just at overhead. And overhead is not waste. If an NGO is investing in computers, even in marketing, that can be really useful and beneficial. And one of the examples we give is, you can imagine a couple of organizations working on polio in the 1950s. And one organization got a 5-star rating because it was spending all its money with volunteers taking people who had polio, wheeling their wheelchairs around in parks, and that would have been a perfectly nice thing to do, and it might have had very low overhead because that's a pretty simple and straightforward thing to do. Another might have been, might have employed Jonas Salk to work on a vaccine, and might have had a rather lower rating because that's a more complicated thing with more investments and overhead. And the upshot would have been that a organization that was developing the Salk vaccine, which was transformative, would have had a lower rating than something that was, wheeling people around parks. And so obviously we don't want to write checks to organizations so that they can build great marble lobbies. But it's also a mistake just to look at overhead as a proxy for impact. Impact is fundamentally what matters. And I think that, and unfortunately, there's no great way of measuring that, other than relying on people who are in a field. I think often we donate to too many organizations, and so we don't really have a clear feel for what they do. I think shrinking the number we support is probably a better idea. Also reduces their costs in handling the money. But impact is fundamentally how you have a difference, not overhead.
So if it's difficult to measure impact, and if in the last 20 years you could almost coincide it with when Bill Gates decides to jump into the philanthropy world, right? I mean, I think there might be a Gatesian effect on philanthropy. How do you figure out for all of those charities, for all of those causes that can't run through the MIT Poverty Lab and be sort of A/B tested for cause and effect, how do you figure out effectiveness and impact?
Well, that's where Path of Fears comes in.
It's in the book.
I think part of the answer is, again, don't try to do everything. Pick an issue that you care about, and then do a certain amount of research on that. Ideally, pick an issue that does involve a certain amount of inequity, and then, if you want to look at healthcare interventions, and do a little bit of research, and try to build a relationship with an organization that you donate to, and look for evidence. And I have to say that while I'm a great believer in these randomized controlled trials, not everything can be tested in that way. And there are some things that are very powerful that you end up just believing in. And it's a leap of faith. And in a sense, it's a little like investments, that you invest in some things and you use metrics and you look at the PE ratio, but it's still a gamble. And some are going to pay off and some aren't. And I think that same spirit, and a little bit also a spirit of risk-taking, is useful in philanthropy. One of the problems in philanthropy is that charities are afraid of making mistakes because, how do you then tell your donors, oh, we screwed up? And one consequence of that is that nobody ever acknowledges their mistakes. And
it's the opposite of that in Silicon Valley, as you point out.
Exactly. And, people are, proud of being bold and
fail fast and, move on.
fail. Yeah. And I always thought there should be a journal called the Journal of Development Mistakes, where people would acknowledge these mistakes and learn from them, because that's fundamentally where we learn. But I think, and I think the other mistake that humanitarian organizations make, and that we in journalism make, is that we focus so much on the problems that we leave the public with the sense that everything is all screwed up, that things are just failing right and left, and let's leave people fatigued and tired and just kind of tuning out. In journalism, we cover planes that crash, not planes that take off. And so people think that all planes, that's their view of aviation, all planes are crashing. And in fact, that's not true. And the backdrop has been tremendous progress in healthcare, in education globally. And I think acknowledging that progress before, as one points to the problems, is a better way of energizing people and getting them to feel inspired to support something.
One of the key populations you want to go after is how do you inspire the incredibly well-to-do to get engaged, right? That's a different.
Yes.
It's a skill.
And one of the problems is that, business schools are incredibly good at things like naming opportunities and giving people this sort of great feedback. And anything that you can put your name on gets over invested in the philanthropic world compared to things that you can't put your name on. So deworming, may be about as cost-effective donation as you can make, but what do you put your name on? And it does seem to me that there should be ways in the modern world of creating this sort of psychic rewards for major philanthropic donors, some are short of the Bill Gates level, who do incredibly powerful things that don't have naming opportunities. And likewise, I would hope that high net worth individuals who've often made their money through incredible shrewdness and brilliance were inclined to to allocate the money philanthropically with the same shrewdness and brilliance, which often I think they're not. I think money is often made very intelligently and given quite foolishly.
So one of the things you also mentioned is, listen, it's not just about being wealthy or just about donating money. You can also volunteer. You can also be an advocate. And I think the advocacy piece is something that people might not be very familiar with, comfortable with. They're like, well, I'm not Nick Kristof. I don't travel around the world. I don't get to see all these people. How do I really engage a cause that I am passionate about without being that annoying person that's always doing bike rides for whatever charity on my Facebook feed, right?
Yeah, I'm such a believer in that. One of my big causes is early childhood interventions, early childhood education, this kind of thing. And certainly, we can do a better job of supporting early childhood programs around the country. But at the end of the day, you're not going to build an interstate highway system by having people, write donations somewhere, or having volunteers go out and build one more square foot of highway. Things like that really are best done by government. And the same, I think, is true of early childhood education. How can that happen? I think it's by people advocating effectively. And there are some organizations, Results is one, results.org, in the international sphere, one, the One campaign, that I think have been very effective. And if anything, I think it's becoming more important because I'm afraid that we in the media are dropping the ball on a lot of these issues that we care deeply about. The media traditionally had a certain sense of noblesse oblige, that this is a spinach story that viewers don't particularly care about, but this is important, damn it, we're gonna cover it, and we're gonna send it out there. And nowadays,
The NewsHour is still about spinach.
and the NewsHour and the New York Times, and present company excluded from everything I say. But in general, if you're the executive producer of a morning TV show, you can send a crew out to Eastern Congo, the most lethal conflict since World War II, and it'll be expensive, and it'll be dangerous, and your ratings will drop compared to putting a Democrat and a Republican in a studio together and have them yell at each other. And that's the challenge that we face. And if things like that don't get covered, then they're not going to get addressed. One of the things that I, as a journalist, found most dispiriting, a few years ago, Bill and Melinda Gates, through their foundation, they gave a grant. They give a grant to ABC News to cover global health and nutrition issues. And it was controversial within the development community, because why should the Gates Foundation essentially be bribing ABC News to do what they should be doing anyway, when that money could be going to keep people alive in the developing world? So it was controversial, but in fact it worked very well. The ABC News did some terrific reporting. Maternal health, micronutrients, a bunch of really great stories. But then after a year, Gates Foundation went back to ABC News and said, okay, we'd like to renew our grant. And ABC News said, no, we don't want to, because we see that when we air these important stories, viewers switch the channel. I found that so depressing. And, but so I'm afraid that if we've dropped the ball in the last 10 years, I'm afraid that we collectively, again, present company accepted, are going to drop it even more in the next 10. And how can we fill that vacuum? Well, we all have our own personal spotlights in the form of our Facebook page or our Twitter feed or our book club or whatever it may be, an office conversation. And there are ways individually to shine a light on some of these issues that we in the media are dropping the ball on, and I hope you all will, pick up that ball as we drop it.
So, a segue to kind of a current state of affairs. You just recently wrote about Syria. It's a problem that clearly has charitable organizations kind of all over it, right? They're trying to figure out whether they can feed enough children in one place. They're trying to figure out what to do with migrants in other places. How does somebody even try to make a difference in that? It seems so far away, so geopolitical. It's really about Germany and these guys, and I don't know what to do.
So let me give a couple of examples. One is there's a quite extraordinary group of Syrians called the White Helmets that when there's a barrel bombing somewhere in Syria, then they rush out. They're unarmed. They rush out and try to pull up the rubble, drag kids off to get medical care, this kind of thing, to try to mitigate the consequences of these sort of barrel bombings. And they're desperate for supplies. They don't have helmets. They don't have crowbars. They don't have all kinds of things that they need. It's very expensive to get gasoline to rush off to a site. And so the White Helmets are folks who are in the thick of it. They're Syrians. They're non-sectarian. They're respected by and large by most of the militias, and a terrific group. There's, and I guess the other thing that I'd say is, look, solving the crisis in Syria is hard, reasonable people can disagree about what the policy should be in Syria. Everybody agrees that Syrian refugees should get an education. 53% of Syrian kids in the surrounding countries are not able to get an education, are not in school. Getting kids in school is something that is fairly straightforward. Groups like the International Rescue Committee do it. They know how to do it. And when we don't educate those kids, we're laying the foundation for the next crisis in 15 years down the road, which we will then address by, billion-an-hour deployments. Education feels expensive, but it is so much cheaper than the alternatives.
All right. Questions from the crowd? I think we're going to have a microphone, or just stick your hand up and a mic will find you. We've left you speechless. We've covered everything in the world. Is that what you're doing? Yeah. Hold on a second so everybody else can hear you.
Thanks for breaking the ice.
Well, I had that hit on deworming, so
Yeah, exactly.
Why stop?
Yeah.
I want to ask about the refugee situation, two aspects of it. From the U.S. perspective, President Obama said today he would increase by 10,000 the amount of Syrian refugees we would take in a year, which was nice, but I thought it was woefully inadequate. We used to take in 150,000 refugees a year. Now we're down to 70 in general. So I'd like your reaction to what's feasible, what you think politically for us to do. Then secondly, from the European point of view, where they're trying to make some steps to accommodate the refugees and the migrants. A little bit, the more they do, the more migrants and refugees are coming because they see they can get in and be resettled. What are your thoughts on how that can be reasonably dealt with?
I mean, in a sense, my answer to both is the same. I agree that we should take more given the crisis, and I think that I admire Angela Merkel for the way she has addressed this and the generosity that she and an awful lot of ordinary Germans have shown toward the refugees. But as you say, there's also a real risk that that generosity then leads to more desperate people taking enormous risks to flee to try to get there, and that it can lead to more islands on the beach. And so ultimately, I think that while the refugee images are so moving, and that that our impulse is that's where we need to address our efforts. Fundamentally, where we need to address our efforts is in Syria and in the surrounding countries where the refugees are, and that's where I think we should most use our political capital in this country. I think the world has behaved kind of disgracefully toward Syria in the last 4 years, and it's hard policy, and there are always more problems in international affairs than there are solutions, but we haven't really tried. And my suggested policy, which I talk about in my column today, is a no-fly zone in the south, partly to create a safe space enforced by naval assets in the Mediterranean, and partly to create more leverage against the Assad regime. And really the aim to be a peace deal, and this would unfortunately be something of a partition of Syria, but sort of end the fighting.
Do you think the Russians would sit for that?
I think that I think it's plausible. I think the Russians and the Iranians are worried that Assad will collapse and they will lose everything. So I think the one thing that is really helping the Assad regime is that he has an air force. If we establish that no-fly zone, and we could do it on the cheap, from basically just telling Assad, look, you fly aircraft in the south, and at some point later we will fire a missile into one of your airstrips and take out one of your planes. I think that he would then get the message and not risk his aircraft. I think that would scare the Russians. I think it would scare the Iranians, and that they would rather have partial regime survival rather than risk losing everything. And would it work? I don't know, but it's worth testing. And this is going to get so much worse. If you think Syria is bad already with 200,000 deaths, wait until you get the same street-to-street fighting that we had in Aleppo. Wait till that comes to Damascus. Wait till you get Islamic State attacking the Druze, who they see as the same as the Yazidi, as infidels. They're, especially when Damascus, when things move to Damascus, it's going to be a catastrophe and risks devolving into genocide. I think the possible steps we can take are complicated. They're uncertain of that they're going to work, but they're worth trying.
Okay. Yes. Hold on a second. Just wait for the mic. Just wait for the mic.
Administration is not looking at that solution.
Yeah, I think they're looking at it quite seriously. I think actually so as you know, David Petraeus and Hillary Clinton and Tom Donilon had suggested this back in this was 2012, and I think Obama thought about it and decided not to. I think he's worried about entanglements, and it's a legitimate concern. And I think he also thought that Assad was going to collapse on his own, that you didn't really need to give a push because the regime was going to collapse. And I think he didn't also appreciate the degree to which, as time went on, you were going to get the fragmentation of militias, you were going to get the rise of these extremists like Islamic State, and ethnic hatreds that would make it so much more difficult. So I think there was a certain amount of miscalculation. I think these days in administration there are a lot of people who are very sympathetic to exactly what I proposed. I think the Pentagon is nervous, and they have every right to be. This might not succeed. And also administrations are always scared of doing something that might not succeed because then it makes you look powerless. And on any given day when you don't really know quite what to do, it's always easier to postpone the issue until tomorrow. And that's how so many humanitarian crises have gotten worse.
What about boots on the ground?
I think boots on the ground would be a bad idea in the case of Syria. I think they would. I think there are many, many Syrians who would be aghast at that, who would see us as invaders. I think the upshot is that would strengthen at least some Syrian groups by giving them this narrative of Western imperialists. And also, I think it would be a bad idea. I also think that politically, it's not realistically an option. And I think we've been very focused on Islamic State, and for obvious reasons. And Islamic State, what they have done to the Yazidi is as brutal as what one has seen anywhere. But ultimately, it's the Assad regime that is empowering Islamic State. And as long as the Assad regime is in place, you're going to have more Sunnis who are so furious at the Assad regime that they're going to grow a beard and join the Islamic State. And so you can't just deal with Islamic State and not with the Assad regime.
Back there, ma'am.
Oh, hi. Everyone here, I'm sure, is just really blown away because you're interesting and what you have to say is compelling. So what I'm wondering is, when are you having your next documentary? I would love to know. And is George Clooney going to be in it?
You have him on speed dial, right? You guys are BFFs, and
So A Path of Beers just came out in paperback. So right now Cheryl and Cheryl is in, I think, Chicago today, and when you say you think your wife is in, and you're not exactly sure what city she's in, it's sort of this crazy thing. So we're still we're still trying to focus on A Path of Beers. We still care deeply about the issues in Half the Sky, and I also care deeply about my column. And the truth is that these things do take me away from the column. I kind of feel I should be in Hungary right now, or Greece, or somewhere, and instead I've set up various things to talk about A Path of Beers, and so it's going to be a little. I want to have a break before I think about another book. Books are wonderful because in the New York Times my space is 780 words, and in a book you can lay out things in much greater depth. And you can have a narrative, you can tell stories and air them out, but I don't want the books that I'm proud of and care about, and the documentaries, which are a great way of not just preaching to the choir, but building the choir. I don't want them to get in the way of something else that I care deeply about, which is my real estate and the Times.
Anybody? Yes, back here in the striped shirt.
Hi. I have a question about your view on China's role in the Syria conflict, if there's any, and also what their position would be if it becomes a bigger conflict nationwide with Europe and America involved, whether there's a place for China at all, whether they want to get involved.
My daughter is actually taking a gap year in China right now, and I'm hoping that China and the New York Times have been kind of feuding.
So any comments you make will make it life very difficult for your daughter? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, she'll be called off. No, but so I'm hoping that the Chinese are they've I've been visiting China for 30 years. We lived there, and the last couple of years I could not get a visa, a journalist visa, which is kind of extraordinary. I don't think that China, especially under Xi Jinping, wants, I think, to play a larger international role. Nationalism is one of the things that he is, I think, personally believes in. I think it also is using for political reasons as a glue to hold the country together. So I think he'd like to have greater leverage in many places. I don't think Syria is particularly one of them. And I think China and China-U.S. relations are going to be, more complicated in the coming years. Partly, I'm not in the camp that thinks the Chinese economy is going to collapse, but I think growth is going to be slower. I think they need fundamentally a new economic model, and at times of slower growth. When they're worried about unemployment, when they're worried about unrest, they're going to be less likely to make concessions on the economic front. I think that the issues of the South China Sea and the East China Sea are ones that the Chinese people are completely behind Xi Jinping on. I think there's a real belief that that Japan stole the Diaoyu Islands and that the Nansha Islands are China's. I don't think there's going to be a lot of compromise there. And, I think the regime is concerned about stability, and on issues of ethnic minorities like the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, on issues of dissidents, I think they're going to be more jittery and probably more controlling. So I think I think we're in for a tough few years. The longer term trends, I think ultimately China is in so many countries in Asia, I watched South Korea become democratic. I watched Taiwan become democratic, Indonesia, and the same thing is going to happen in China, but it sure doesn't look like it's going to happen in the next couple of years.
There's a viewer that wrote in yesterday, I don't know if it was tongue-in-cheek or not, he said we should take all the Syrians and put them in the ghost cities in China.
They'll get housing.
There's housing, yeah, right here, sir. Hold on a second, wait for just a second, wait for the mic.
Nick, back to your column. One of the many things I love about reading your column is that you shine a bright light in dark corners that are otherwise not being covered. Could you share with us one or two of the dark corners that you're researching now that we may not be sufficiently aware of that we'll eventually see in your column?
I mean, sure. Well, some of the issues that I'm looking at, and I must say, whenever I shine a light in a dark corner, then my readership drops. It's chastening as a journalist. I mean, but so in one issue is the Rohingya in Burma, in Myanmar. You have Rohingya who are confined to camps. They were born in Burma. They lived there for generations, many generations, and they're being now told that they are foreigners, that they are stateless, and in these camps they are being denied medical care. Doctors Without Borders was kicked out from the area. You have women dying needlessly in childbirth. You have kids dying of diarrhea. And this is just so aggravating to see. And I don't think we have exercised enough leverage, we as a country. I think it was embarrassing for the Obama administration because it saw, rightly to some degree, Burma is something of a success. And it's embarrassing to be yelling at them for horrendously oppressing the Rohingya minority. And Aung San Suu Kyi, who I have so much admiration for in many ways, has been very unhelpful on the Rohingya. So that's one issue. I mean, I don't know whether I can get back in. All these issues are sort of, visas are complicated. I mean, Darfur, I haven't been able to get to for years. Darfur, I'd love to figure out a way of getting back in.
Are you an infamous man at the airports? Do they know if Nick Kristof's showing up?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to sneak into Bahrain I had a clean passport. I thought my old passport was the problem. Those Bahrainis are pretty smart. I got nailed at immigration. And a bunch of in Sudan, I was able to sneak in July from the south into an area called the Nuba Mountains, where you have the government daily bombing civilians. One of the poorest parts of the world, their citizens' main interaction with the 21st century is being bombed. And what particularly outraged me was that international organizations, including many that I have great respect for, weren't supplying things like vaccines to the Nuba Mountains because the only way of getting them in would be to smuggle them in. Sudan is blockading the area, so isn't allowing vaccines or anti-leprosy medication or anti-TB medication in. And so if you want to get vaccines in, then the only way to do it is to give it to aid groups and to have it cross the border illegally the way I did. And that offends a sense of protocol, and so kids die needlessly of measles. And so I hopefully raised enough of a ruckus that maybe eased somewhat. But these are things that are really stark. But for my average reader, they pick up the paper. They've got to be at work in 20 minutes. This is some terrible thing happening somewhere in the world, but I'm really busy, and meanwhile, what did Trump say yesterday? And that's the challenge. How do you continue to shine a light on issues and make them engaging and tell stories in a way that will keep a light, and also, to some degree, hold our politicians, our leaders' feet to the fire.
Juxtapose that with your homage to the national parks. Did that column do better than these dark cornered?
Yeah, that was a light corner of the world.
Yeah.
Anything in the U.S. tends to do better.
Interesting.
And what tends to do worse is anything sort of policy related, anything far away that is kind of sort of sad and just that people kind of feel, look, I've got enough problems. Why do I need to know about the problems of the Rohingya? And it's really hard to do an uplifting column about the Rohingya.
So that about wraps up our time. It's about 8 o'clock, but I just want to remind folks that Nick will be signing copies of the book. Linda?
Yeah,
Thank you.